Welcome to Enroute, the podcast of the First Responder Behavioral Health Institute. The First Responder Behavioral Health Institute is bringing together some of the most inspiring and dedicated change agents in the global public safety, psychotherapy, and educational communities. Each episode of Enroute seeks to bring together first responder change agents and clinicians dedicated to constructively disrupting the status quo by tackling the tough subjects like first responder suicide, post-traumatic stress, moral injury, sanctuary trauma, leadership development, critical incident response, peer support teams, and what it means to be psychologically safe and healthy while working in an unsafe world. All units, please stand by. The Enroute podcast is about to begin. You can resume normal traffic on this channel after this transmission. Welcome to this episode of Enroute. I'm Joseph Burgundy. Today we have the privilege of sitting in the presence of a gentle giant in the law enforcement and health and wellness community. Christopher Davis is a recently retired assistant police chief and a military veteran. He's also the creator of Yoga 911. He's on a mission to increase our awareness about the power of yoga and meditation as a resiliency tool for first responders. He explains how it enhances wellness and reduces individual suffering. His programs are geared for the first responder community, and his trainings improve professional and personal performance. When you look at images of Chris, you're immediately thinking he's here to teach tactical SWAT operations or deployment strategies. Once you meet him, you're changed by his tranquility and his inner peace. He is perhaps the most unlikely person you would expect to be a gifted yoga and meditation instructor, but he is certainly that and so much more. He cares greatly about the health and wellness of first responders and making sure you get the most out of your time in service. Join me for an exciting shift in perspective and experience the calming influence that is yoga and mindfulness instructor, Christopher Davis. Chris, thank you for joining us on this episode of Enroute. We're glad to have you. For people who don't know your story and who you are, why don't you go ahead and tell our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Again, thanks for having me on, Joseph. My name's Chris Davis. I currently live in Sanford, North Carolina. I was in the military during the Desert Storm, Desert Shield era. Got out shortly after that. And started with the Fayetteville, North Carolina Police Department, which for geographic coordination is basically Fort Bragg or Fort Liberty now. I was there for 25 years. I retired in 2018 as an assistant chief of police and have been doing kind of the mindfulness yoga thing ever since 2017.
You know, when I introduce you and talk about you in some of my seminars, I ask people what it is they think you teach and what they think you do before I tell them about you. And almost everybody says tactical operations, SWAT team, kind of stuff. And then I kind of laugh and I tell them, believe it or not, he teaches yoga, mindfulness, meditation, as well as being a career law enforcement professional and a senior staff member. Tell our viewers how it is you came to embrace yoga, mindfulness, meditation, and now you're teaching as a yoga instructor on your own. I want you to tell us a little bit about what Yoga 911 is all about and how you came to embrace it, and what was the path like to start learning how to teach it?
It was actually quite by accident. I would like to think there was some divine intervention involved in there somewhere. Back in probably 2015 or so, my wife took me to a yoga class, and it was just actually me, her, and the teacher. I enjoyed the class, but it was more of a physical thing to me. I didn't get any mental benefits from it, so it wasn't something I was dying to go back and try again. Shortly after that, I believe it was about 2015, we got a new police chief in at Fayetteville Police Department. It was the first time we had an outside chief come in a long time. Typically, we promoted from within. So, as in many situations, a new police chief coming in, especially from the outside, there were going to be a lot of changes. And I don't think I know myself and most of the people in the department didn't have a problem with change, but it's kind of how that change was implemented, kind of through threats and intimidation, and it really started to take a toll on me from a mental, primarily from a mental perspective. I didn't realize it at the time, but ultimately it kind of brought me to the lowest point of my professional career. While this was all going on, when I was at the training center at the time, I was a lieutenant. One of my training partners asked me to participate with her in a yoga challenge, which was, how many yoga classes can you go to in 30 days? So being the person that I am, I gladly accepted the challenge. And I ultimately ended up going to about 22 yoga classes in that 30-day period. So I didn't go into the challenge or even into the yoga classes with the idea that yoga was going to help me, save me, or even make me feel better. But I think I know now, it took me several years to figure out what happened, but at least in my mind, what happened was why I was at such a low point in my life. And I don't know how everybody's got different spiritual beliefs and different beliefs about their internal energy and so on. But the word chi, C-H-I, is a common word that people use for energy, often used in martial arts when people focus their chi. If you're breaking a board, you're focusing all your emphasis on one small point of that board. Well, in this case, I had stuck chi, or basically the energy in my body was stagnant, it wasn't flowing, and it was causing mental and physical issues with me. So ultimately, going to yoga classes for 20 yoga classes in a 30-day period, ultimately it got my energy moving again, or got my chi moving again. And ultimately that, coupled with EMDR, continuing to work out, and prescription medication for anxiety for a short period of time, actually I started to get better. And when I talk about that, I talk about the things that help me get better. When I talk to groups, I often talk about, you need to find what your formula is. For me, my formula was yoga, mindfulness training, continuing to work out, EMDR, and prescription medication. So your formula is going to be, everybody's formula is going to be different. So I encourage you, if you're going through any difficulties at all, kind of push yourself beyond your comfort zone a little bit and find out what works for you.
That's wonderful. I really appreciate what you just said there. Each person is different. They're going to have a different path to their own healing process and to their recovery. And you said a lot here in just a couple of minutes. You were talking a little bit about toxicity within the police department. Am I understanding that correctly?
Absolutely.
All right. One of the things that so many police, fire, EMS, first responder people, when they come to me and they're stressed out, often suicidal, often struggling with things that are going on in their career. I've learned over the years, it's not the call. I mean, the call is a catalyst to what brought them into therapy. And I do EMDR with them. I'm certified in it, and it is highly effective. But one of the things that is a recurrent theme that comes up over and over again with our clients, and it is one of the things that as a practicing clinician raises my index of suspicion of suicidality, is when they start talking about the leadership and a lack of support. Terms are now starting to be created: sanctuary trauma, moral injury. And these things are describing leadership that may be, at the bare minimum, not supportive, but often hostile and toxic. You and I were both brought up in the last generation. You'll do what we say, or you'll do what we say. There's a toxicity often that can underline some of that. Talk to me a little bit about how that was when you started, and hopefully how leadership development and leadership is starting to change with this next generation of recruits.
Well, again, Joseph, I think it goes back to when I talked about everybody, and you reemphasize everybody has a different path. I think every leader's got a different leadership style. And I think, unfortunately, I'm kind of a advocate of the 60-20-20 rule. And by that, I mean, 60% of the people actively want to continue to try to become better leaders. 20% are already good leaders and continue to want to be leaders. And there's that 20% that really don't care or don't have the ability, kind of like a narcissistic type personality, don't have the ability and or the desire to improve their leadership skills. So in my case, I was dealing with a person who was I didn't really know what a narcissist was until I dealt with this individual. But he knew that he was going to be, in hindsight, I know he knew he was going to be there for about 3 years. So his mission was to go in and make as big as impact as possible without worrying about the collateral damage. So when he left, the department was in quite disarray. And what was really kind of puzzling or difficult for me to handle in the eyes of the community, which, community policing is a big thing, and you need the support of the community to do well in the law enforcement profession. In the eyes of the community, he was a gift from God. He was very political, knew how to say the right things, very polished speaker. So it was like kind of the yin and the yang. He had the outgoing personality. The public loved him. Internally, not so much. So back to your original question, that's a puzzling question to me as far as how has leadership changed. I would like to think that it's more open as far as being having more empathy, more understanding of your employees or your officers, so that maybe that 20% of the people that don't care or don't have the ability maybe is shrinking just a little bit would be my hope.
Good. You talked about that leadership style. I've run into hostile leadership styles, toxic leadership styles, malignant leadership styles. As I've often taught, the Institute breaks its coursework down into 3 areas. Psychology of the self, which is where we like offering courses like yours, Yoga 911 and methods of meditation and mindfulness. The psychology of how we deal with the public, as an old paramedic myself, there are, and having taught the subject, there's not one page in the paramedic manual about how to take care of yourself. Not one. And then we get into the psychology of the public. And when it comes through a behavioral health point of view, there's about 20 pages in most paramedic manuals, and they are voluminous, multi-volume series. We teach you so much cardiology and so much trauma medicine and how to deliver a baby and all this great stuff. How do you handle a behavioral health emergency? Right around 20-some pages, and 15 or so of those pages are about physical restraint of the patient or chemical restraint of the patient. Mm-hmm. Nothing about how to de-escalate, negotiate, understand the signs and symptoms of somebody in psychosis, or how to, talk somebody down in a crisis situation. So that training isn't there. And then the last part of the area we try to focus on as an institute for our classes is perhaps the biggest elephant in the room, and that's organizational development. Mm-hmm. Leadership development, and how we can go ahead and improve our agencies by improving our leaders. They tend to forget, when we were in school, it was called industrial psychology. Now it's organizational development, leadership development. But what it's about is running your agencies collaboratively, using best practices, and motivating people instead of intimidating them, marginalizing them, or targeting people for removal. You also do a little bit of leadership development training. Tell me about that.
I've kind of dabbled in it a little bit. Okay. I've actually, Stephen Kotler wrote a book about it's called The Art of the Impossible, basically how to utilize flow to improve your performance personally and professionally being leadership. So that's kind of where I've actually done a presentation a couple times. The latest was at the North Carolina Law Enforcement Women's Association in Wrightsville Beach, North Carolina, a couple months ago. It went very well. So I'm all about, and I joke to people when I talk about policing to people that aren't in the business, and I tell them, to me, policing in general and leadership in general is common sense. But unfortunately, a lot of people don't have that. I would consider it a gift of just common sense, being able to think about what are the ramifications of the decision I'm going to make? Who's it going to affect? How's it going to affect them? Instead, they just kind of react. And that's where the whole mindfulness comes in. Instead of simply reacting to a stimulus, you actually pause between, and then Viktor Frankl talks about that space between stimulus and response is our freedom. Well, that's free. And the whole thing, one of my focuses is on that space in between the stimulus and response, to pause, take a breath, whatever you need to do to make the best decision possible at the time based on the information you have.
Yeah. I'm a huge existentialist, and Viktor Frankl's work was life-changing for me. You recently did a post comparing and contrasting Viktor Frankl with someone else, something about the dash. Would you like to go into that a little bit? I think our listeners would benefit a great deal.
Sure. There's and they would have to go to my post on the website. I can't remember the author of the dash right now, but basically the dash is, for example, she talks about, when somebody's doing your eulogy, they talk about Chris Davis, born 1964, died, we'll say, hopefully 2055. That dash in between the two dates, that's basically your life. What did that dash encompass? Were you continually trying to grow? Were you continually trying to be a better person, better husband, better friend, better police officer, whatever during that time? So what does that dash say about you? And then it occurred to me when, again, I'm a big Viktor Frankl fan, as you are, who's a Holocaust survivor, by the way, if you're not familiar with his work. And he talks about in between stimulus and response is that space, and in that space lies our freedom. Unfortunately, a lot of people, a lot of police officers, first responders, they get the stimulus and they simply react. They don't take the time to pause and make the best decision possible. With that, I kind of liken that space in between the stimulus and response to the dash that they were talking about in the quote. So to me, it was kind of like an epiphany that actually two people were trying to basically say the same thing, that the sweet spot of our lives is in the center. Do we actually take the time, one, to notice it, and two, to do the best that we can with that time?
Absolutely. And I'm looking at your LinkedIn post now, and it was Linda Ellis
Thank you.
that wrote the dash, and then compared and contrasted with Viktor Frankl's observations as well. And I just thought that was a brilliant comparison. And it does talk to that need to pause. First responders can get very reactionary on scene. And one of the things that I try to teach them in my leadership and critical incident courses is to not get caught up. It's not your emergency. Don't make it your emergency. When you start becoming emotionally charged here, you're not, in that professional space anymore. You're moving into this, and all of a sudden you're taking things personally. You're reacting from a place where you're starting to engage a spiral of behavior and a spiral of what's going on, rather than being that calm source that steps in and is able to de-escalate things. Unfortunately, I've seen first responders do it, and they end up escalating situations where, more than once I've had somebody very calmly negotiated onto the gurney, and we're going to go ahead and get out of here. And some fire captain or some senior paramedic walks in, says something absolutely ridiculous and charges the situation up now. And now we have a fight on our hands, or we're having to consider involuntarily confining somebody when they were willing to go voluntarily before you showed up.
Right.
So we're not getting the best out of our officers, because sometimes they come into those scenes highly charged. And as I try to teach them in the work, I'm also a heavy-duty Jungian. I love the work of Carl Jung, and I let them know you're coming from your wounds, you're coming from your shadow, you're coming from your pain. Yep. So a lot of the work that you do is about helping people examine their pain. So is mindfulness different than yoga? Tell me a little bit about the comparison and contrast and how they work together in your life.
I would consider, and this is Chris Davis's theory, I would consider yoga a mindfulness practice. So mindfulness to me would be kind of the big umbrella, where yoga would be one of the smaller umbrellas underneath that big umbrella. There's all different kinds of mindfulness, of course, meditation, and there's all types of there's all types of yoga, there's all types of meditation. So, and what I love about kind of the whole mindfulness field is there's a saying in yoga, it's your practice, and it truly is your practice. You find out what, like we were talking about earlier, finding your formula for being well and staying well. You need to find your practice, the practice that works for you, whether it be a certain type of yoga, whether it be a certain type of meditation, a combination of the two, and just find out what works for you. And the only way you're going to do that is to get out there and kind of try it. And Joseph, when you were talking about that person that would come on scene, you had everything pretty much under control, and then they would kind of aggravate things, and ultimately you'd end up have a fight on your hands. It happened to me tons of times in policing. And if you think about it, it made me think about, so part of mindfulness and especially yoga is the ego thing. And a lot of guys, especially females too, but primarily guys, have a problem with trying yoga because their ego gets in their way. They'll say, I'm not flexible, I can't stretch. And my argument to that would be, well, if you can't stretch, you're not flexible, who needs yoga more than you do? But the ego gets in the way where it doesn't allow you to get outside your comfort zone. And the old saying is that's where your greatest growth lies, is when you're working outside your comfort zone or letting your ego go to the side. And when you go to that person that comes on the scene and wants to take charge, if you think about it, it's their ego. They want to be perceived as in charge, not as kind of passive, where they're actually being passive at times is beneficial. Like you were saying, if you can get the person on the gurney to voluntarily go to the hospital as opposed to a fight or an involuntary commitment, I mean, that's a win-win situation. But too often we let our egos get in the way, and it causes problems.
Yeah, absolutely. So creating that space in between is part of your work in teaching mindfulness and teaching meditation. And we all need to practice. As I tell my clients, listen, I don't care if it's biking. And I will experience this with a lot of folks that are suffering from post-traumatic injury. They'll attempt this, and once the mind quiets, they can't handle it. So because of the fact that they're experiencing post-traumatic stress, they can't do sitting and crossing their legs. Within a few minutes, it actually triggers them. And as I let them know, there's walking meditations. Several other cultures have talked about this. A mindfulness meditation practice can be as simple as, I tell them to please look at the dance of the tree. Find a beautiful tree and experience the wind moving its branches. It's dancing for you. Just breathe in and breathe out. Before COVID, I had a beautiful office on the 7th floor, and I was able to look down a couple of levels at these big old trees. And anytime after a critical session or something, I would just breathe in and breathe out into those trees, and you could watch the dancing of those leaves. And you look up and 5 or 6 minutes has gone by, or 15 minutes has gone by. It felt like 2 or 3 minutes. So that's just as much as a meditation as sitting with your legs crossed, trying to, relax the mind. So there's walking meditations, there's focused meditations. What other skills do you give your clients to help them? Basically, I think I'm trying to say present moment awareness. What techniques do you use to help them get there?
Breath work would be number one. I think with any meditation, I would suggest that you sit down and you can YouTube. For example, box breathing. You inhale for a 4 count, you hold for a 4 count, you exhale for a 4 count, and you hold out for a 4 count. Do that for 5 rounds before you start your meditation. And what I really like is I too have a problem with just kind of being still with my own thoughts. So what works well for me is a guided meditation. So there's a technique, it's called I rest. It's a little I with a big R, then little EST. It stands for integrative restoration. It was actually a guided meditation developed at Walter Reed Hospital probably 25 years ago now, when soldiers started coming back from the Middle East with various issues, mental, physical, spiritually. It actually is a guided meditation that there's a lot of research on it, which is kind of unique to meditation as far as having the research to back up the statement that it's beneficial, but it actually allowed them to sleep or relax at a level that they hadn't been able to do at that point. So I've actually done that at quite a few conferences here lately, and that's actually a pretty popular request.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I'll use is a 4-8-4 method. And you're right, there's dozens. If you just put in breathing in YouTube, you'll find everything from the Yoga Institute to a half a dozen other great places that will teach different breathing techniques for different things. The 4-8-4, I was able to go ahead and learn that the members of the RCMP and SWAT teams use that to stay focused while they're going through a building and clearing a building, to go ahead and keep their pulses down and keep them comfortable. And Mark Bouchard with the RCMP, who wrote Setting Your Sights on Stigma, Thoughts from an Injured Mind, and teaches on our platform, had taught that to me. And about 4 weeks later, my crisis response team was out with somebody who had had someone literally jump out into the street, and they had hit them with a vehicle. And the person was, down to 1 and 2 word breaths and not able to focus. And I worked 4-8-4 breathing with them for under 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. Complete shift out of the amygdala, back into the frontal lobe, able to give a statement, able to talk, able to go ahead and communicate what had happened and what they saw. They were, absolutely unapproachable. And that's one of the reasons they got me out there. Breathing techniques work in a crisis. Breathing techniques work for SWAT teams and emergency response crisis teams. Breathing techniques work in the clinical treatment suite, and breathing techniques are a part of mindfulness and meditation. So thank you for sharing a little bit about that. There's a couple other great areas. Well, I could talk to you all day, so I have to be very careful with our time together. But I want to go ahead and take a little bit of time to talk about first responder physical fitness. Mm-hmm. You're a big advocate of regular physical fitness physicals, and one of the things that we had talked about in the pre-interview was you brought up a great point that in the course of an officer's career, they're probably going to use a firearm once, but yet they're qualifying it on every year, but not on their physicals. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit more about your thoughts in that area and how agencies can benefit from incorporating a physical fitness regime or some kind of wellness checkups.
Okay, great question. One of my favorite areas to talk about. And I'll use North Carolina as an example, and I think a lot of states have similar practices. In North Carolina, you have to take the POPAT, which is the police officer physical abilities test, at the time of graduation from the basic academy. Once you pass that, unless the agency specifically requires it, which is just a handful of agencies within the state, I would say no more than 5% would be my guess. You never have to take another physical fitness test to remain a law enforcement officer for the next 30 years, which to me is crazy. So much of what we do is physical or requires the ability to be physical. Now, don't get me wrong. I know oftentimes you sit in a car for 8, 10, 12 hours a day and don't do a whole lot. And there may be a week, there may be a month that goes by where you don't have to do anything very physical and you, quote, don't need those skills. But sooner or later, and it's not a question of if, it's just a question of when, you're going to need to be, in my mind, need to be physical fit to, 1, protect yourself, 2, to protect community member, and 3, protect a fellow officer. So, and I use an example of, we talk about moral injury. I use the example of, if you're and I'm going to make a long story short here. If you're in a fight, if you see one of your coworkers in a fight, you get there and have to climb a 6-foot fence, but because you put on 20, 30, 40, 50 pounds over the course of the last few years, you're unable to get over that fence. And now your buddy's getting his butt handed to him because you're unable to go and help him. I would think you would have some level of moral injury, i.e. feeling bad about not being able to help your coworker. So to me, I think you owe it to yourself, you owe it to your coworkers, you owe it to the community, and you owe it to your family to be in at least moderate shape so that you can handle yourself accordingly.
One of the other images, since I've been following your work on LinkedIn, that you had put up as an officer who arguably had to be over 100 pounds overweight. And the question you had asked was, stayed with me. Is the suspect more or less likely to challenge that officer than one who's physically fit? And I would have to say much more likely to give it a try.
And run from the officer, which is not going to really hurt anybody. But again, and think about, from a use of force standpoint, that would theoretically affect the number of use of force incidents an agency has over the course of a given year.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you think wellness checkups and physical fitness checkups should be annual? How do you think that should roll out in an agency?
I think at a minimum, an officer ought to have a physical fitness test one per year. People often wonder, I remember walking around Fayetteville Police Department, we were thinking about implementing a policy, and I kind of joked, I didn't have to wear my bulletproof vest around for safety from the public, but I had to wear it internally because everybody thought everybody's going to take shots at me because they thought they were going to lose their job. They actually had to take a physical fitness test. Type thing. And kind of my answer to that was, I get it. But my answer to that would be, so you're a police chief or a command staff member and you want to implement a yearly PT assessment. My suggestion would be, for example, starting July 2024, anybody that signs up with your department, including people that are in the academy, has to basically sign on the dotted line and say, hey, as part of my conditions of employment, I'm willing or able to take a PT test once a year for the rest of my career. So, and you can grandfather the people that are currently in. So there's people, you get a small percentage of people that would want to participate. And if you're able, again, from a police chief perspective or a sheriff's perspective, if you can give them an incentive, that's great, whether it be monetary, which I know isn't often the case. But what about if they got a cut on the cost of their medical insurance? What if they got a little ribbon to put on their uniform that basically says PT, shows that they passed the PT test? So I think there's a bunch of different ways you can do at a very low cost to do that. And as far as, I believe the same should apply for mental wellness checks as well. I think there needs to be a mental, physical fitness, you got mind, body, and spirit. Physical fitness is only one aspect of the holistic approach to wellness. And that was my problem, why I got in so much trouble. I was physically fit pretty much my whole life, and when I was going through my not so great time, but mentally I wasn't where I needed to be, and I wasn't aware of that. So again, if you're a police chief, you need to take a holistic approach to wellness if you're gonna try to do it right.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I get called the bad guy because I often will articulate a similar line of thought that annual psychologicals are not a bad thing, and then everybody hates me. And I'm like, okay. There's ways to do that and to protect the member and to make sure that information does not get back. This is leadership development and OD. You can outsource this. This is why I prefer that police departments and fire departments have contracts with agencies like ours, as well as having internal wellness people. Yes, but a couple of agencies that have taken me up on it, we do an annual psychological. You have to come see me. You don't have to speak to me. I don't report to internal affairs. I don't report to the chief. You can sit here for the entire hour and fold your hands if you'd like to try that. My charms eventually will wear them down a little bit, and they'll start talking, or they'll do something like, I have absolutely no problems. However, there's this guy on my shift, or I have a teenage daughter and she's driving me crazy. Mm-hmm. And you know what? It's an Enroute, and it gives us a chance to talk to them about therapy and what the psychotherapeutic process is like, and how beneficial it can be. One of the things I do when I do my debriefings, and I go on out and I do diffusings and work with departments and teach, is let them know, listen, I am a product of this process. I am not above it or above taking my own medicine. I underwent a half a dozen years of depth psychology and psychoanalysis. I have had my psyche shredded apart and put back together by one of the world's best. And it let me know my shortcomings. It let me know my areas of growth. It let me know where my ego was out of alignment. It let me know where I might have been projecting a little bit onto people, and that I was needing to go ahead and examine why this or that repetitive pattern kept coming up in my life. So I am the result of the process I speak on. We don't hire counselors for the Counseling Center of Texas who haven't undergone counseling themselves. And so, it's about being able to smash that stigma, normalize this. It is my hope that by the time I retire, that counseling and mental health and psychotherapy is approximately as boring as a dental office appointment. That it's just something we do, and that we check in with somebody and we establish those relationships ahead of time. And one of the hardest parts with, those salty members who have been on a long time in police and fire departments and in the military is they don't believe that there's a separation. They somehow think I'm going to report to Internal Affairs. In a well-designed program, you can sever that to where they just get access. And I find once they let us in to teach, once they get to know us before emergencies, they're much more likely to go ahead and rely on us or call on us, and to establish a relationship with us before something goes left. It is so much harder to decide to go through all of the literature and go to all the websites and try to find somebody competent in complex trauma and post-traumatic injury while you're in the middle of a crisis. So having that person on your bench and having that relationship set up ahead of time is a wonderful thing that helps keep you growing and moving forward. So your own processes have led you to your own healing. Some of our members are struggling greatly. And that brings us into another area you and I are both extremely passionate about, and that's first responder suicide. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts on that and your approach to helping our members find their way through that.
First, I guess my personal experience with that is, they always, I always heard growing up or throughout my policing career that somebody that commits suicide was being selfish, and I didn't necessarily agree with that, or I did not disagree with it, but I just it was always in the back of my mind. But until I got to the lowest point of my life dealing with that organizational stress that we talked about earlier, in all honesty, I was the closest to contemplating suicide that I had ever had been in my life. So at that point, I realized it's not, at least for me, I would like to argue, and I think probably for most people, it's not a selfish act. You just want the pain to stop. And I don't think you have the ability, or at least I did not have the ability to see, one, the impact that it might have on other people if I had gone through with it, or two, and my problem was I did not have the ability to see the light at the end of the tunnel. So I realized at that point that I can understand why people get to the point where they actually die by suicide, is because they just don't have the ability, or they can't see that light at the end of the tunnel, or no help that things are going to get better. When we all know, and it's an old cliche, but time does heal all wounds, and I would attest to that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's an important part of your own journey and your healing. It's important for our members to hear how rough it can get. And that's been my experience with suicide as well. It is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And I've never, ever interviewed somebody or worked with a client who has attempted suicide who actually wanted to kill themselves. When we lift the lid on that, I needed the pain to stop now, Joseph, and I didn't know how to do it. I was at the end of my rope and I saw no other options, and I just needed it to stop. So there's many great article has been written, and I'm forgetting the CHP officer's name who worked with the Golden Gate Bridge. Had a tremendous story of a person that he was instrumental in talking down who did not want to kill themselves when they got to it. Now they're on the speaking and lecture circuit together. As a matter of fact, you've just given me a thought. I need to get them both on the show. But and interviewing those who have jumped from the Golden Gate Bridge that survived it, the split second they let go, it was like, oh, whoa. I didn't want to do this. And I've seen that with those, saves as a paramedic. By the time we get the IV in them and get them stabilized from the gunshot wound, they're like, I shouldn't have done that, or from the overdose of the pills, they're like, it was wrong thinking. But at the moment, the pain overtakes logic and reasoning, and it causes them to act on their suffering. And you're right, time. I won't say time heals all wounds, but it does lessen its grasp and its grip on us. And by going through a good psychoanalytic process, it gives us the perspective to be with it. I'll often tell my trauma survivors, we were going to be working together for a while. One of the things that is instrumental in your healing is a transitioning from the pain to the victim mindset to it just is. It just was, and I am okay. So that's going to take us time. It might take EMDR. It might take us sending you off to see a psychiatrist. Although I would say I'm extremely gifted at keeping people off meds or reducing those medications. Sometimes they're necessary. But the more you engage physical activity, the more you get out there and seek other holistic solutions, the less we need to go ahead and engage some of those other processes. But, it is a struggle that is real. In my conferences, I acknowledge that based on the statistics, at least 15 to 30% of this room has contemplated suicide. And I had that discussion with the Texas Medical Directors Conference a couple of years ago. And I had to let them know, by the way, you're all so well educated, and education absolutely is not a buffer to suicide. Yeah. We lose somewhere between 300 and 600 emergency room physicians or physicians annually. So going to school, going all the way, you would think from a public perspective, they have their medical doctorate, so this is a trained healthcare professional, and their suicide rates are just as high as first responders.
Yeah. Just one thing I wanted to, we talked, go back just a little bit in reference to mandatory wellness, mental wellness checks. I think that goes back to, you asked me, what do I kind of propose to lessen the chance of the rate of suicide in first responders? One, with that mandatory wellness check, I think you're accomplishing two things. One, you're obviously giving them a chance to talk, and oftentimes that's all it takes is people just want an opportunity or a chance or a person to listen to them, whatever the topic is. Two, if everybody has to do it from the chief on down or the sheriff on down, you take away some of that stigma that applies to that check. If you only have to go because you're in trouble or somebody recommends that you need a mental assessment, then obviously there's going to be some stigma attached to it. But if everybody has to do it, it definitely, I'm not going to say it completely takes away, but it definitely lessens the stigma attached to the process.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Tell me your thoughts on peer support teams. I was shocked. At one of the last conferences I was at, over 150 departments there, I said, raise your hand if you have a high-functioning peer support team. And out of 150 people, maybe 8 people put their hands up. I said, raise your hand, if you have a peer support team at all. And about 30 out of 150 agencies.
I think the key phrase there was high functioning. I think you definitely limited your participation there, because I would argue that number doesn't surprise me when you put high functioning with that. That means, that's a squared away peer support team with some qualified people that have had some good training and use it on a regular basis, where, most agencies, it's been my experience, kind of dabble in that middle of the road area where they have a peer support team, maybe not a whole lot of training, maybe don't use it a whole lot. They may not have a departmental policy in place on how it's used. Confidentiality is not addressed. A lot of the key characteristics of a good program aren't there. And then, of course, you got the other 20% or so that don't have anything. So that doesn't surprise me at all. But I think it goes back to you get what you pay for, or you get what you train for. If you put time and effort in your peer support team, as far as training, some mock training where, you have a mock critical incident, where do the peer support, do they respond to the scene? Do they respond to the station once the officers are back there? And one of the things we haven't talked about yet, but I talk about, as far as mindfulness and yoga, or really anything, but I'm going to stick with mindfulness and yoga. If you do something once, how good are you going to be at it? Most departments, I know in North Carolina, you have to qualify with your weapon one time per year at night and during the day. So my argument is, how good are you going to be in a high stress situation when you have to do something once per year? More than likely, not very well. So it goes back to yoga and mindfulness. If you only practice it once a year or sporadically throughout the course of the year, is it going to be beneficial? Honestly, probably not. You have to do something on a regular basis. Amishi Jha, who wrote Peak Mind, she's a big mindfulness professor down at University of Miami, says that based on her research at her lab at the University of Miami, minimum is 12 minutes. I believe it was 3 or 4 times per day. So to get the benefit. So again, that's 3 times per week, 12 minutes a day, not a whole lot, but it's something that you have to do on a regular basis. So if you want to be good at anything, shooting, yoga, mindfulness, playing chess, woodworking, whatever, you have to do it on a regular basis. And people, and I'm as guilty as anybody else, but people think for some reason that when the hits the fan, that they're going to perform well under stress. Well, I'm here to tell you, I've been under stress. I've been involved in a shooting situation. If you're not prepared mentally and tactfully and training wise, you're not gonna perform well. So, and then it goes back to, from a police chief standpoint, when our officers go through a critical incident, we'll say an officer involved shooting, and they end up getting diagnosed with PTSD by a licensed psychologist, is it really a big surprise? Yeah. They haven't had any wellness training. They haven't had there's no wellness program in the department. Is it a big surprise that they now have PTSD or some other mental related issues? It shouldn't be.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I agree. And thank you so much for giving us that formula. So she's saying 3 or 4 times a day, giving it 12 minutes. Is that what she's advocating?
Yep, that's the minimum dose, and she actually says it's dose specific. Obviously, if you do it at the minimum, you're going to get the minimum results. The more you do it, the better your results are going to be, which I love. Basically, you get what you put into it.
There you go. I want to thank you for improving my own practices. I knew you were coming on to the show today. And then I went ahead and as a result of that, I have a wonderful Qigong practice I do, the 8 pieces of brocade. And am used to doing it twice a day. I loved yoga, but 24 movements, and I had some back issues being an old paramedic. Some yoga instructors I got were just wonderful. Others, I'm like, oh, why did I go to that class? And the 8 pieces of brocade for me were something that I could learn. It's only 8 movements. You could learn it pretty quickly over about 3 weeks, and it was transportable, so I could take it with me very easily and incorporate it into my life. If you do 4 repetitions of the 8 pieces of brocade, you got a 15-minute practice. If you do 12 or 15 or 20 repetitions, you've got an hour and 10 minutes, so you can expand it and you can collapse it. And it had been my practice for the last several years to do it at least once, if not twice a day. That practice had slipped off. And I knew I was coming to see you today. So I went ahead and got into the studio early, and I did my meditation. I did my Qigong today, and I feel totally on point, centered, and on my game. And then I had to put my head down and go, you should be doing it every day, right? Yeah. So I guess I let my practice slip a bit, and I wanted to thank you for just your mere presence brought it back. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Good. So you're out lecturing, you're teaching. What do you got coming up where people can hear you lecture or teach? How does someone get a hold of you if they want to go ahead and take yoga with you in person or online?
I have a little one-man company, Yoga 911. It's an LLC. You can contact me at yoga911@yahoo.com if you want to inquire about some training. I personalize the training anywhere from 4 hours to a train the trainer, where I actually Charlotte PD in North Carolina actually did a train the trainer. We did 40 hours with the idea. We had about 15 officers, sworn and non-sworn members of the department, kind of get a quick yoga teacher class training. So with the idea that they can go out and teach at the various locations without the department, without relying on a yoga teacher or me to come and do a yoga practice. So it's cost effective and it's convenient. As far as upcoming events, I don't have a whole lot going on right now. I'm going to do something with the Special Olympics in December in the mountains of North Carolina. I'm actually tentatively scheduled to be hired as a consultant. I'm not going to mention the agency's name because it's not a done deal yet, but one of the larger departments in North Carolina to come on as a consultant to revamp their wellness program with the idea of taking that holistic approach and hopefully improving on an already good plan. And what's ironic is the police chief there, she has a good plan compared to a lot of departments within the state, and I would argue within the nation, but she's still willing to kind of take that extra step to make things a little bit better. So again, I can individualize it pretty much to anything that you need from a departmental standpoint. And again, one thing, I guess, so why should you do this type of training? And I often talk to police chiefs and command staff members. Would you rather pay, not necessarily me, but would you rather the department pay, say, example, $20,000, $50,000 for a wellness program, which seems like a lot of money, especially for small departments, or would you rather pay that $100,000, $200,000, $1 million lawsuit because your officers didn't perform well because they were under stress and they did make the right decision? So it's kind of like, I argue, to be a good police chief, to be a good leader, you have to have the ability to see the big picture, the long-term effects of your decisions or indecisions in this case. So be proactive. So much of what we do in this profession is reactive. Be proactive and try to prevent the officer from getting to the point where he or she needs the services that we've talked about today. That would be my dream, for you to put me out of business where there's no longer a need for it, because it's just like Joseph was saying earlier, it's just something that we do. It's like when they implemented the seatbelt law, everybody was throwing up their hands. I got to wear a seatbelt. Now I would argue probably for 90% of the population, it's just second nature now. So
yeah. Your last statement really goes into why you do what you do, and it really underscores your passion for first responders, your journey. So as we start to close, do you want to tell our members why you do what you do? And at last, thoughts for any struggling first responders that are considering suicide or a career transition? What can you say to them?
Why I do what I do. And I think about this a lot, and it changes over time, but I do it because I saw how beneficial it was for me, and I can't help but think it's going to be beneficial. And I know for a fact it's beneficial for other first responders. My other why is if I can prevent an officer from feeling as low as I did back in 2017, then I've accomplished something. And that's kind of my goal, to never let them get to a point where they feel, where they consider suicide or doing something rash. And I guess that would be about it. As far as anybody that's struggling, I would find somebody that you can trust, that you can talk to. I guarantee you, again, it's more than likely your ego getting in the way of allowing you to talk. I know it was for me. And think about it from my perspective. I was a lieutenant, so I was a mid-level manager. I actually was in charge of a peer support team. I wrote the policy for our department on peer support. So here I am thinking, I'm a mid-level manager, so that kind of limits who I can talk to. I'm in charge of the peer support team. I wrote the policy, and damn, I can't even take care of myself, or I can't even help myself. Who am I going to talk to? So more than likely, you're not in kind of the same pigeonhole that I was, hopefully. and just find somewhere that you can. I mean, what do you got to lose? Other than slowly beginning to feel a little bit better and ultimately, hopefully, blossoming and becoming a better version of you, and then someday looking back and thinking that you went through this trialed time. There was a reason behind it, and that's one of the thing. And just thanks for prompting me. That's one thing. I look back. If I had not gone through the BS that I'd gone through back in 2017, I wouldn't be talking to you today. So I believe, again, divine intervention, whatever your belief in a higher being is, I believe they put me through that for a reason. Hopefully it was to be here talking to you today and help other folks out there. And feel free to reach out to me at that yoga911@yahoo.com. If you want to talk, reach out to me via email. I'll be happy to supply my phone number to you, and we can either FaceTime or just talk if you need somebody to talk to. Or if not, I've got some friends that know some people that can direct you, I'm sure, as well as Joseph does as well.
There you go, Chris. You are the embodiment of a concept Daniel Sundahl is now starting to promote heavily: post-traumatic growth. And that is the silver lining behind this. For me, it helps so much when I'm working with my first responders, and they will, after a bunch of sessions, they'll say, did you ever have PTSD? I'm like, you think I just woke up and became a complex trauma therapist? That's great. Mm-hmm. But it also lets me know, I guess, my journey's gone enough that it's not still hanging on me. It's not something that I'm suffering from. It's something that I've incorporated and moved on from, and I'm offering value. And the post-traumatic growth, becoming a complex trauma specialist, would not have occurred if I hadn't have taken this journey myself. So you have so much to offer. Go to Yoga 911, get a hold of Chris. Talk to him about bringing programs in. We're also trying to get him to teach an online version of Yoga 911 for the First Responder Behavioral Health Institute sometime next year, if we can book him. And we're still talking to him about that. But Chris Davis, an honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much for sharing your heart, your passion, and your journey with us and our members today. And we're just grateful you're out there trying to make the world a better place. So thank you for taking the time to come on Enroute. And I'm going to do everything in my power to have you back on another episode within the next season. So thank you.
I appreciate it. I'm very grateful for you giving me the opportunity to talk to folks. Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.
Bye, everybody. I'm Joseph Brigandi. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Enroute. Enroute is a production of the First Responder Behavioral Health Institute. To learn more about us, head on over to FRBHI.